All right, welcome to today's session on arrays and for each loops. So I'm going to start off by describing what an array is. An array is basically a variable of some sort that has a specific data type. Much like an integer is a data type, we can have a variable that represents a specific integer and another variable that represents a specific string type. Except for an array, we would have a set of values that are comma delimited. And when you declare the data type, you would use square brackets in front of the data type. So we would have something like int, square brackets, numbers is the name of the variable. I want to have one variable name that represents this set of numbers, right? So we're going to have curly brace open, curly brace close, and then semicolon. So let's type something like that in. I have Visual Studio open. I type in int, square brackets, let's say my numbers, and I can do something like curly open, curly close, parenthesis, semicolon, and I can have a set of numbers 5, 6, 7, 9, something like that. So this would be an array, a one-dimensional array of integer values. This one variable represents this set of numbers. I can do the same thing for a string array. So I have a string array of names, looks something like that. Very interesting. You can actually declare a variable and not set any initial values. So in this case, I declared the name of the variable numbers. The initial set of values are these. If I want to create an array called scores and just have the set of values be blank, I could do something like this. But this indicates that I have a set of 10 values in this array. Now the most important thing to note is that when we have an array in C#, the first position of the value would be index position 0. Very, very important. So we start counting from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, even though there are technically 5 values. We're starting our counting of the index from position 0. Very important. Probably want to write that down. So supposing we have a string of names, Matt, so and so, we could have the first value be index value 0, index value 1, index value 2. So let's see how this works. Let me plug in console.read, pause my screen. I'm going to plug in console.writeLine, and we're going to go ahead and print out my numbers, square bracket 0. So I'm going to try to print out the first value, my numbers. So if I need to print out the first value, I can print out my numbers at position 0. Right, so let's run this. And you see, I see the number 5 pop up. Right, so number 5 is the first value in the array. So hopefully you get the idea. Let's go ahead and print out my numbers at position 3. Right, this is the index of the array. So if I were to run that, at position 3, the value is 9, assuming I'm counting from 0, 1, 2, 3. Let's pretend that I mistakenly thought we were counting from 1, and I try to write out my numbers at position 4. And I run this code. I get a nasty error message that says index was out of bounds of the array. This is because this is the index. I'm looking for index 4, and there is no index 4. This is index 0, 1, 2, 3. There is no fourth value, right? So hopefully that makes sense. Now supposing we want to print out all the values in the array, we would probably use maybe a for loop. So let's go ahead and write for tab, as you probably recall, and I'm going to plug in my console.write line in here, right? The length is going to be, perhaps I have 1, 2, 3, 4. I want to check if it's less than 4. So I'm going to start counting at 0, and each time I iterate through this, I would get position I, where I is starting from 0 to 3. 0, 1, 2, 3. So position 0 will be 5, position 1, 6. You get the idea. In this case, instead of printing out a specific number, I'm making this dynamic, where I could simply, using the loop, right, find the index in this value and print it out. Just give that a shot. If I were to do that, I end up with 5, 6, 7, 9, right? That's the right output. So hopefully that makes sense. This is how I plug in the specific index, make this dynamic, so I can loop through and show a set of values. Now supposing I had string array of names and curly, let's say Johnny, Scotty. I'm going to go for Pippin. Scotty Pippin. Here we go. Right. Need my double quotes. Supposing I had this and I wanted to print out this set of names, I could change this to print out names, this array, string array, but this time I only have 3 values. So I'm going to have this iterate to 3, right? So starting, if I count from 0, I want to find it till I have less than 3, right? If I get to 3, I've gone too far. Let's print that out. I got Johnny, Scotty, Pippin, right? Hopefully that makes sense. Now, a for loop would do this for us, but there is this concept of a for each loop, which can make life a lot easier for us. So a for each loop looks something like this. We have the keyword for each. We will create a variable. If we are iterating through a set of integer values, well, then we would create an integer variable. If we're iterating through a string, we would create a string variable. And then this set of values, the variable, the array name, is what we're going to plug in here. Sometimes we'll call an array a type of collection, right? So plug in the collection name. So let's say I want to do exactly what I did here, but I want to use a for each loop. So I'm going to comment out my for loop. I'm going to type in keyword for each, all one word, tab, as you know. I'm going to keep this var data type. That way, I don't really need to change the variable type, right? All I need to do is plug in the right collection name. So collection name is red squiggly line because I need to plug in a valid array or list. So I plug in names. This is a variable that I'm creating. It could be John, K, A, B, C, D. I'm choosing to keep item as the default. What I could do in here is actually print out console.writeLine item, right? So this item, each time we iterate through this, item becomes a new value. So item, the first iteration of the loop would be Johnny. The next iteration would be Scotty. The next iteration would be Pippin. Let's give that a shot. All right, so I print that out. That is exactly the same way that I got the for loop to work. Except notice with the for each, I don't really need to know the index. So a for each is useful if we don't need to know the number of repetitions, right? If I'm using a for loop, I need to know the upper boundary, the maximum number of values in the array, right? So I had to know that I had 4 values and I was going to iterate starting my count from 0 through 3. When I get to 0, 1, 2, 3 for this array, I was going to stop. Whereas for a for each loop, I don't really need to know the length of this thing, right? So hopefully you get that idea. The for each loop is a lot easier to work with. I personally prefer a for each loop over a for loop. Technically, a for loop is faster than a for each loop, but you can play with both when you have your assignment and you're working on things, see which one works best for you. All right, so moving on. We already worked with this example. I'm going to skip over lists. We'll talk about that later on. I showed you the difference between a for loop and a for each loop. And I'm going to walk through what a while loop is, and then I'll let you loose to work on your lab assignment. Okay, so a while loop is similar. It's another type of loop, right? So use the keyword while. And actually, let's do while tab tab. Actually, while tab tab gives me the structure of a while loop, right? So you would typically have some type of condition here. Let me move this down here so we can focus more on the while loop without interfering with this. Generally, much like a for loop, a while loop needs some type of counter in most cases. So we need to create a counter, except instead of what we're used to with a for loop, creating a counter is part of the structure of a for loop. But if I'm creating a while loop, I would create my variable outside of this while loop. So I could create a variable, some type of counter, let's call it j, and set the initial value to 0. Then I could plug in a condition. So in this case, I want to simulate what I did there. Have some type of condition, I greater than 0. In fact, why don't I just use this array to do this? That way we have something more consistent. So I'm checking this time, this is j, right? Where j is less than 3. And then I could do something like print out names, right? And we're looking for index of j. So notice, just like a for loop, I have a variable that I'm declaring, except for a while loop, that is declared outside of the while loop. The condition in a for loop is repeated here in a while loop, right? So initial value and declaration of the variable is outside. The condition we're testing for is part of this. If this is true, we're going to write out this value. And somehow we need to implement logic to increment the value, right? So I'm going to plug in JJ. So after I print this out, I would be interested in incrementing the value. So this will continue to loop. Anytime it adds 1 to it, it's going to check, is that value less than 3? If it's less than 3, print the next value, so on and so forth, right? Give that a shot. So I'm running a while loop now, and the output is practically the same. So notice I have 3 different ways, right, of printing out some values in an array or running a loop. This time let's call this the while loop implementation, and we're going to uncomment this, see if there's any difference. They both can be used to achieve just about the same thing. I personally use the for each loop a little bit more often than not, but you get the idea of how to work with all 3 of these. This would be our for loop, and let's uncomment this. So now we can run this piece of code and see what happens. All right. So I've got while loop, Johnny, Scotty, Pippin. For each loop, same concept. For loop, same output, right? Exact same results. But it's interesting to learn the different constructs and how to use them. You've got a nice example there. That's all that we're covering in this video. You can look at some of the sample code to get a better idea of what's going on. but I think you have enough to now attempt to work on your lab exercise. Good luck and have a good rest of your day.